Our big focus tonight is the Russia-Ukraine war. President Vladimir Putin claims that Russia is rapidly gaining ground in eastern Ukraine. This as the situation on the eastern front continues to deteriorate for Ukraine. Kyiv has rushed its best troops and more firepower to defend Pokrovsk, where Russian troops are piling pressure. The big question, has Ukraine's Kursk offensive backfired?
Ukraine is feeling the heat. Its audacious attack in Kursk isn't working out as planned. Russian forces are instead pushing ahead with greater ferocity. In a desperate attempt, Ukraine launched over 150 drones into Russian territory. Its biggest drone attack on Russia so far targeted power plants and an oil refinery. This is Belgorod in Russia, a heavily damaged kindergarten, burnt cars, damaged buildings. The Russian response was swift and devastating. Kyiv says missiles struck a shopping mall and an events complex in the northeastern city of Kharkiv. Dozens of people, including children, were injured. This is the moment a missile landed on Kharkiv. A little further away on the eastern front lines lies the real problem for President Zelensky, where Russian forces using heavy artillery and the devastating glide bombs are seeking to break through Ukrainian defense lines.
Now, it's not about advancing 200 or 300 meters forward. We didn't have such rates of advance in Donbass for a long time. The Russian armed forces reclaim under their control not 200 or 300 square meters of territories, but square kilometers.
Pokrovsk, once home to 80,000 people, is steadily emptying out and shutting down as Russians close in. Pokrovsk lies on the intersection of a key road that supplies Ukrainian troops and towns across the eastern front and has long been a target for the Russian army. On the 6th of August, Ukraine made the audacious incursion into Russia's Kursk region, looking to divert Moscow's forces away from eastern Ukraine. All it has achieved so far is making Russia double down on its push to seize more territory in eastern Ukraine. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And that's the latest coming in from the Russia-Ukraine war, where Ukraine was being lauded for its Kursk operation. But weeks into it, it seems like Ukraine is on its back foot. We're also hearing that at least 47 people were injured in a Russian attack on Kharkiv. That was Ukraine's second biggest city, and officials said that Russia fired at least 10 missiles on the city, hitting sites including a shopping mall. Following the attack, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky again urged Kyiv's allies, mainly the West, to allow it to fire the Western-supplied missiles deeper into Russian territory to reduce Moscow's military threat. And coming right after that, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky renewed calls for Western allies to allow the use of weapons, as we told you, for strikes deep inside Russia. And he says that he's positive about getting his clearance after a meeting with the Dutch Prime Minister. We are awaiting more details on that front. In a more worrying development, we are also hearing that Russia could make changes to its doctrine on its use of nuclear weapons. And it says that this comes in response to what it regards as a Western escalation in the war in Ukraine. And more coming in about the doctrine on its use of nuclear weapons by Russia. The Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Ryabkov, has also said on record that the work on this process is at an advanced stage. And to take this story further, we are being joined by Charles Kupchan from Washington, D.C. He's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and the professor of international affairs at Georgetown University in the Walsh School of Foreign Service and Department of Government. Professor, thank you so much for joining us here on WION.
Sure, good to be with you.
Professor, Ukraine was being lauded for its Kursk operation, but as things stand right now, who do you think has the upper hand?
I think neither side actually has the upper hand right now. Clearly, the success of the Ukrainian forces in taking about 400 square miles of Russian territory is a development. It's an embarrassment for the Kremlin. It's a setback for the Kremlin's war effort. Yet it has not succeeded in distracting a large number of Russian troops from the main front line in Donbass. As you've been reporting, Russia is advancing towards Pokrovsk and Donetsk. They seem to be trying to push their way to the administrative boundaries of both Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts. And in that respect, Ukraine's successful incursion into the Kursk region has not really been a game changer in the sense of affecting the battlefield in Ukraine itself. I think we're looking big picture at a stalemate. That stalemate is likely to settle in even as Russia makes small gains in eastern Ukraine.
All right. Now, Russia is also saying that it will change its nuclear doctrine due to Western escalation, as it calls it, in Ukraine. Do you think that's a hollow promise?
Yes. I mean, we've seen the Russians really since the beginning of this conflict saber rattle with nuclear weapons. Putin has said many times, we have all options at our disposal. There have been nuclear exercises. This is all about a game of chicken, a test of wills, if you will, with the United States and its allies giving Ukraine a bit more room to use Western weapons against Russian targets. The Russians are saying, be careful, don't push us to make a decision to use nuclear weapons. This is more a question of posturing than it is an actual threat to escalate to the nuclear level. That having been said, the war in Ukraine remains an extraordinarily dangerous war. It could turn into a conflict between NATO and Russia. Russia could decide at some point to use nuclear weapons. That's why all parties need to tread carefully.
Professor, before I let you go, if we could widen our lens a little and talk a little more about politics and geopolitics. We know within two months we have the US presidential elections. It is a possibility that Donald Trump might come back to the White House. We're also seeing a rise of the far right. We saw what happened in France. Far right made a pretty big claim in the parliament, and now we're also hearing Germany's far right party, the AfD, might be winning its first state elections ever since the World War II. I want to ask you, with so much changing in the world of politics in the West, how does that have an impact on the war in Ukraine?
Well, it's an excellent question, and we are living through a period in the West in which our political centers are hollowing out. It's happened here in the United States, it's happened in the United Kingdom, and now, as you said, it's happening in France and Germany. And what that says is that not only do we face an external threat from China, from Russia, but we face an internal threat from illiberal populism, from far-right ethno-nationalist parties emerging and threatening the norms and traditions of liberal democracy. What's the impact of the war in Ukraine? Well, I think it suggests that we need to discuss what the linkages are. And clearly, in the case of Europe, the far right is benefiting in part from the influx of migrants, of refugees from Ukraine, in part from the expenditures. So we need to keep in mind how the war in Ukraine is playing at home in Europe and the United States.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for giving us your insight. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Bye-bye.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.